the desire to live a happy, healthy, and long life is universal. If you don't want to live healthier and longer, you might have a problem with it.
Aging kills more people than cancer, more than heart disease, more than Alzheimer's. In fact, aging is the underlying driver of almost all of them.
Longevity is available today. If you have millions and millions and millions of dollars and free time and no need to really work, you can find a longevity protocol today. That's not real longevity.
Over 9 trillion is spent globally on healthcare each year, mostly treating late-stage decline. Meanwhile, scientists are measuring biological age organ by organ. The science is accelerating, policy is not.
For policy discussions, right, when we're talking about why we spend $1 billion on Medicare, it's the fact that we have such a short health span in America. The majority of the spending from Medicare comes from people using those services. So if we can have people live healthy until they're 75, 5-10 years after Medicare starts, the services that will need to be rendered are much lower and we can balance the budget.
Dalen V. Livingston founded the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives, the first advocacy organization dedicated to turning aging biology into national policy. He helped establish Longevity Science Caucus in Congress. He is influencing how lawmakers think about lifespan. He represents a new generation asking a radical question. What if growing old isn't something we just accept?
With the biggest part of our budget is for aging people. That's aging 1.0, Meals on Wheels and retirement homes. That's managing the decline. We spend a lot on it, billions and billions and trillions of dollars a year. What we're talking about is aging 2.0. How can we prevent you from needing to be maintained in your 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s? And the way to do that is via technology and biotech specifically. The fact of the matter is it hasn't picked up yet because the field is so new.
How do you convince lawmakers from completely different political sides to agree that aging research deserves attention?
Fortunate or unfortunate fact about life is no matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're going to age.
What's realistic right now and what's still hype?
I think you could argue that everything is realistic and everything is hype.
Dalen, welcome to Drug Diaries. Let me start with something uncomfortable. Aging kills more people than cancer, more than heart disease, more than Alzheimer's. In fact, aging is the underlying driver of almost all of them. And yet we don't classify it as a disease. We don't regulate it like one. We don't fund it like one. We accept it and we move on. But what if that acceptance is costing us decades of healthy life? Over 9 trillion is spent globally on healthcare each year, mostly treating late-stage decline. Meanwhile, AI is identifying aging targets faster than ever. Scientists are measuring biological age organ by organ. Investors have poured more than $25 billion into longevity since 2020. The science is accelerating, policy is not. And here's the real tension. If aging becomes treatable, healthcare changes, retirement changes, economics change, power structures change. And that's not just biology, that's disruption. Today's guest is one of the people pushing that disruption into government. Dalen V. Livingston founded the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives, the first advocacy organization dedicated to turning aging biology into national policy. He helped establish Longevity Science Caucus in Congress. He is influencing how lawmakers think about lifespan. And he represents a new generation asking a radical question. What if growing old isn't something we just accept? Dalen, welcome to Drug Diaries.
That was great. Thank you so much for having me. That was a great introduction. I'm excited to be here. This is going to be a great conversation.
We're looking forward to it. So, Dalen, most people don't grow up thinking, I'm going to change how governments think about aging. And yet, here you are, leading one of the most important policy conversations of our time. So, before all of this, who were you? What did you think your life was going to look like?
Yeah, so you're totally right in that, not a lot of kids or, people growing up think about aging or, doing something about it. And less people think about it, from a politics and policy standpoint, right? And
That's part of, I think the uniqueness of A4LI is we're doing something that no one else on earth is doing, right? We're advocating for government structures, like you said, to kind of support and, accept that, people are living healthier and longer than ever before. We should encourage that. Obviously, we should, put money towards technologies that's going to make that better and more equitable for everybody. But then also, how does, pensions and healthcare and, societal relationships and work, how do these things all look when people are able to live healthy into their 70s, 80s, 90s, and maybe even beyond, right? And so it's a unique world to be in. I got into it actually when I was about 12, and I like to call myself like a child of the revolution to kind of inspire some like 60s vibes. But I got introduced to the field from my father, who runs a broker dealer on Wall Street. He was a big nanotechnology investor back in the early 2000s, and that kind of led him into these sort of applications of nanotechnology fields, health, material science, space, AI, like robotics, etc. And I'll never forget when I was 12, he went to a conference the day before, and he was driving me to school the next day, and he pulled out his phone and he showed me a video of a guy he met at the conference. And some of your viewers may know this man, some of them may not. His name is Aubrey de Grey, and I encourage you all to Google him, because you'll see what I saw when I was 12. I saw a fascinating man with a long beard talking about, potions and concoctions to, stop aging, right? And, I don't know if I fully understood what was being said back then, but I do know that I was completely enamored by the idea, and definitely by that beard as well. So that was my first introduction to the field. I grew up, got into politics, wasn't, a biology major or anything like that. Got into politics during college, and ultimately ended up working for the Biden campaign out in Pennsylvania. At the same time, obviously, when the 2020 election was happening, COVID was running rampant, and it was my senior year of college. I was the starting pitcher on the baseball team, and that all got shut down. I was doing my physics thesis, that all got shut down. The summer and spring festivities after college all shut down, right? And I was locked in a basement with my family, and my 92-year-old grandfather moved in with us, and we were all walking on eggshells, wiping down the groceries, etc., to make sure that we protected my grandfather. And I'll never forget like sitting in my basement wondering like why is it that like I am not worried about this at all. I'm I'm not going to die. I'm 22. I'm a former college athlete. Like I'm in good shape. But why is it that grandpa is at such a high risk for dying from COVID? And I remembered back to the conversation I had with my dad when I was 12, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, aging is clearly the underlying factor here that differentiates me from my grandfather in our response to COVID, and then also every other disease, like you were saying in the intro. And so that kind of got me back into this aging field. I was, again, working in politics at the time. I would like do campaign work and then listen to podcasts at the same time, kind of thing. And then once the campaign ended, I looked around and I said, hey, I'm a big fan of this longevity field. I want to move it forward, or the ideas and the inspiration that it draws in people to live healthier and longer. The beauty of giving people more time with their loved ones and to experience this beauty on earth. I really like the idea. This is what I want to commit my life to. I'm not a biologist. Maybe I go back to school, or, hey, I just worked in the winning president's campaign in Pennsylvania. Maybe I can, try to make some changes in government and policy, which is something that every scientist that I was listening to at the time was calling for. And so after the campaign and some political work, I started A4LI in 2022. We've been around obviously for about 4 years. And, during that time, the conversation around longevity in these, policymakers' offices has really changed. It went from being a complete unknown to something that, we're seeing the administration and, members of Congress starting to actually push for and be supportive of. So this is, phase 1A of a much larger plan here, but, we're moving in the right direction. And that's A4LI's mission, is to help these policymakers understand, pass the most effective legislation, and then kind of figure out how we kind of reorganize society to ultimately deal with longer, healthier lives. deal with is not the right word. Deal with sounds like a negative. But I'll
Right.
think of another word. It's a good thing. It's a blessing.
Absolutely. That's a fascinating journey. And if anyone had to imagine the background of someone like you who's playing the role that you are, doing the work that you are, people might assume that you've spent half of your career in a lab or a gerontologist, but you come from a completely different background, physics, and I think you were a big time into baseball. So that's yeah, right.
Yeah. Baseball guy. Yep. I was more of a baseball guy than a physics guy, I would say. But yeah. Totally. Yeah. Well, look, I think the field needs different voices, right? I think there is benefit to me being a politics and a campaign guy and knowing how to like talk to people about issues in a very succinct amount of time and boil it and distill it into a way that they can digest it. I've had experiences bringing scientists in front of policymakers, and when you're in that world, this is what I've seen. You're so kind of, entrapped in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis that sometimes you forget to zoom out and kind of talk about the big picture and synthesize it in a way that someone who is a layman can understand, right? And, I've spent years and years understanding longevity in my own way and in a way that I think is very translatable to policymakers because neither of us are biologists. So how do I understand it is the way that, that they probably will understand it. Right. And using analogies like, my favorite one is the car analogy. Like, we all know the lifespan of a car is 15 years, let's say. And if you don't get the engine, checked and the oil changed and you drive on bumpy roads, that car is going to last 10 years. And, if you take good care of it and, change the oil and are a dutiful owner, that can maybe be a 20-year car, right? And that's the kind of analogy that we talk about here. And we talk about damage of the car or our body. And that those are great analogies that, sometimes I think people in academia miss because, they're talking about which protein or, what mechanism of action a specific therapeutic or molecule is gonna affect. So I think the field needs more, we need investors, we need advocates, we need policy makers, we need policy, think tanks and thought policy producers, right? We to grow this into an ecosystem that actually is mature and, we have drugs that are available. We need other parts of society to contribute and step in. I like talking about that because it's an encouragement to some of the people I know to maybe, get involved, people who are really supportive of the field, but don't know where to start. There's always something that you can do to help this, an emerging industry like this kind of take the next step forward.
Right. I really love the analogy of the car. That's such a beautiful way of simplifying a complex subject. And you mentioned about Aubrey D. Gray. So I had the chance of hosting him on Drug Diaries, and it was a fascinating conversation.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
He's great.
Yeah, he's amazing. The clarity of his vision and his logic is just amazing. It's remarkable. Such an amazing guy.
Tidbit, he's like, in his spare time, he solves unsolvable math problems. You should ask him about that next time you have him on. I don't know if he mentioned that.
No.
But if you look at his like Wikipedia, he solved, I forget what it was, but he solved like a math problem that like has been in existence for 600 years and has never been solved. And he was doing this on the flights between agent conferences.
Wow. Crazy genius.
But yeah, Aubrey he's the inspiration, for not just me, a lot of people in this field, right? His TED Talk in the early 2000s really, inspired the next generation to take this more seriously. And, I think, I stand on shoulders of giants and I stand on the shoulders of giants so that others can stand on my shoulders, right? This is a longer process than some may like, but if you look at the progress from, 2005 to 2025, it's remarkable. Like the ecosystem didn't exist. There were, a handful of labs doing this kind of work and it was very underfunded. Yeah. And in the last 20 years, we now have a division of the NIH that does this work, that does geroscience. And we have 2 program managers at ARPA-H doing longevity research. And we have people in government that are supportive. And we have hundreds and hundreds of biotechs and billions of dollars in investment. Like the field really, like it when I talk to people and advocates or founders or enthusiasts, they're like, oh, I wish it was going faster. But if you take a step back and just realize where we were when I was, like 7 years old, that it's pretty remarkable.
Right. Wow. Dylan, starting a political advocacy group for longevity isn't exactly a traditional career path, as we discussed, and it's not a safe option, if you ask me honestly. So, what made you say someone has to build this, and it might as well be me?
It's not a safe path, but it always felt like the safe path to me
Hmm.
because I never wanted to do anything else. Like, I mean, I did at certain points in my life, but once I kind of had that like eureka moments of, oh wait, longevity is my mission in life. I'd never had, a vision to really do anything else outside of longevity, at least until this problem is solved. Then I'll have as much time as I want to go be an engineer or read all the books I want. But, until then, this is my life's mission. And so, never felt like unsure pathway to me. I mean, there are times obviously that I felt, that there are roller coasters in any kind of journey like this, but I saw that it was needed, right? And there was a market for it, right? And so I was pretty confident that it would work because there are, like I said, there's billions of investment in longevity. All of them need a political voice, right? So, I was never worried about that. Now, if you're gonna ask me about the like day-to-day fluctuations of dealing with government and politics, that I've had my doubts at points just because it's a beast, right? Government's a beast.
Yeah.
So, that has made me not unsure, but, has changed my mood maybe more than, the vision of actually establishing something like this. Because that, something like this needs to exist. Right?
Yeah.
It exists for every other advocacy area. If you look at, retired people, they have AARP. If you look at NRA, if you look at the gun lobbyists or the gun industry, they have the NRA. If you look at the pharma industry, they have their industry.
Yes.
Right. So for all of these like emerging AI and crypto and, you name it. Right. So something like this needed to exist. So I was confident it was going to exist. Right. Now dealing with the craziness of politics sometimes, it's an up and down battle, but that's why you got someone like me who's always upbeat to do this work.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think every new movement meets skepticism, and people once thought space travel was impossible, but now it's commercial. So, when you first started talking to policymakers about longevity, what kind of reaction did you get?
Yeah, I mean, no one's really opposed it. I think there's more like curiosity than like, tell me more. I want to see more is usually the attitude, right? Which is a positive, right? If it was, I don't want to see more, that's obviously, means that they don't support it, right?
Yeah.
We have spent a lot of time finding our champions. So there's people that are in our caucus that are, strongly supportive of this field. But then, even the other Congress people and senators we talk to, we get that same reaction of like, oh, you explained it to me in like a way that I understand. And, I'm looking at this now as sort of like the next evolution of medicine. And it actually makes sense to me. Oh, yeah, it would make sense that aging is the driver of the diseases of age, right? Oh, if we target the biology of aging, maybe we can affect those diseases.
Yeah.
Like it's a very logical line of thought that if you just lay it out to them, right? I mean, who doesn't support that? Nihilists, right? Like, everybody wants to live healthier or longer. If you don't want to live healthier and longer, we, think you might have a problem with you usually, right? So yeah, when you kind of, but I think the key is when you're talking to policymakers, I mentioned the car analogy before, you really need to lay it out in simple terms because that's how you get that, oh, I want to hear more reaction. I have, been testifying in state government houses and, federal settings for the last couple of years. And there is the potential for, I guess, misconceptions that the public can create from the headlines, and they do seep into the political discourse. So, you'll hear the, argument that this is going to be for billionaires and this is a vanity project for billionaires trying to spend all their money. Right. And so, people will see that, right, in an article, maybe they'll say, oh, this billionaire that I don't like is funding research in longevity. Oh, that means it must mean it's bad. Right. Yeah. But when you explain to them, like, no, hey, they're actually putting their money into something that you can benefit from and something that will make your life, your health span longer and your quality of life better. Here's how it's done. Then it, you can quickly dissolve those kind of misconceptions. Yeah. I will say, as this field gets bigger, there are going to be more people that are, general detractors, because that's kind of how, fields like this kind of evolve. So, we have to do a very good job in the field kind of letting people know our priorities, right? There's this kind of, not schism, but there's these like two camps in the field, and one's very focused on, life extension, and the other is more talking about health span extension, right?
Yes.
And I look, personally, I want to live for as long as I can, right? I think that's, I want to try to stay as healthy and alive for as long as possible. But, when you're talking about this to a policymaker, you might want to, lean more into health span extension. It's a little more palatable. It's something that everybody can wrap their head around. But also for policy discussions, right, when we're talking about, why we spend $1 billion on Medicare, it's the fact that we have such a short health span in America. And, the majority of the spending from Medicare comes from, people using those services, right? So if we can have people live healthy until they're 75, 10 years after Medicare starts, the services that will need to be rendered are much lower, and we can balance the budget, right? And so my point in saying all of this is, the industry needs to come up with this messaging that works, that will dispel the myths and the narratives that can be spun by, random detractors in the public. And, we need to distill it in a way. And, we're not like misconstruing what we're trying to do here, right? We're explaining it in a way that shows the benefit to everybody. And like, we need to put the benefits of this front and center when we talk about aging, longevity, geroscience, whatever word you want to use.
And for the benefit of our audience, in 2023, the US saw the formation of the Longevity Science Caucus in Congress, a bipartisan effort focused on aging biology. But before that, there was no real political infrastructure around longevity. And Dylan, you helped create the Longevity Science Caucus in Congress, which is no small feat in today's political climate. How do you convince lawmakers from completely different political sides to agree that aging research deserves attention?
Fortunate or unfortunate fact about life is, no matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're going to age, and you're going to have to deal with the diseases and conditions of aging. And like I said, the desire to live a happy, healthy, and long life is universal.
Yes.
So at its core, this is an issue that affects everybody, and, should be a bipartisan initiative. I don't think you mentioned our caucus is bipartisan, right? So we have an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. And so we were very intentional with that, because we want to send the message to everybody that this is an issue space that affects everybody. Right. But then also, when you're trying to find common ground or a reason why different sides of the aisle might support something, the other beautiful thing about longevity is it kind of ties into many other political areas. So like I was talking about before with Medicare, if you're talking to a fiscal conservative who's trying to balance the budget, the number one thing I would lead with is, we're not going to balance the budget by cutting USAID. That is not a big enough part of our budget to make any dent.
Yeah.
The biggest driver, other than, like military, is Medicare, right? And, the way to lower Medicare costs is by having less people use Medicare. How do we do that? Have a preventative protocol that, gets people, sort of on this prevention and proactive, trajectory in healthcare at an earlier age, and prevent them from being sick and needing those services when they're 70 and 80, right? Use it for only emergencies instead of kind of general daily lifestyle and living. And so, like I was saying before, longevity can be tied, if you wanted to take the military angle, right? Very clearly, we want our best soldiers, every country does, to be in tip-top fighting shape, right, for national security purposes, right? There's a recruitment issue generally in the U.S. every year, and people are leaving the service at a higher rate. So, if you can extend the service time of a soldier 10 years and keep the most experienced soldiers, you're going to have a better fighting force, right? So if you're talking to someone who's very involved with the military or focused on that, that's, the talking point that I would use, and it's 100% true. If you're talking to a Democrat who is focused on health equity, the line is, look, right now longevity is available, right? We see the billionaires that are going and getting these expensive experimental treatments, and, who can spend all day working out and eating right. But the average person, that's not accessible for. Like, even me, I'm in the longevity field. I can't spend 6 hours a day, doing hot Pilates and yoga and going to the sauna. For 99.999% of the world, that's not possible.
Yeah.
Especially not for, people in, dire economic straits. What's a potential, pathway to, having everybody more on an equal playing field when it comes to health span and lifespan? Let's find a drug that is mass produced or a therapeutic that can be mass produced and get into the hands of as many people as possible. And, then that kind of evens the playing field. For example, like metformin, which is a popular longevity drug, or rapamycin, they cost cents per pill, right? Literally cents per pill. Anybody can afford it. And so that's something that's kind of distributable, and also something that, kind of evens the playing field between those people that have 6 hours a day to work on their longevity and everybody else, right? If you want to close that gap, let's find a widely available and cheap compound that can act as a, metabolic health drug that can increase healthy lifespan by 5 to 10 years. And that's the way to kind of even the playing field, right? So point in going on this whole tangent is, there are ways to tie what we're doing into both sides of the aisle. And that's what brings both sides of the aisle to the table, in my opinion. Beyond just the general interest for, personal reasons or, whatever it is, this is something that, appeals to both sides for different reasons. And something that I think, I've been very deliberate in getting out there, and something that I think the field should be more cognizant about when we're talking about some of these issues.
And we all know that aging is the #1 risk factor for most chronic diseases. Yet it really gets treated as a core target in healthcare policy. Why do you think aging has been left out of the main healthcare conversation for so long?
Well, I don't think aging has been left out. I think like the NIA is one of the, I forget what rank, but they're one of the biggest institutes out of the 27 at the NIH. And Medicare and is for aging people, right? That's the biggest part of our budget, is for aging people. That's aging 1.0. That's Meals on Wheels and, retirement homes, right? That's managing the decline. We spend a lot on that. We spend so much on that. Billions and billions and trillions of dollars a year. What we're talking about is aging 2.0. How can we prevent you from needing to be maintained in your 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s? And the way to do that is via technology and biotech specifically, right? And so that conversation, has not picked up. The fact of the matter is, it hasn't picked up yet because the field is so new. Like, if you look at the biggest companies in the space, they were most likely put together in the 2020s, and very few of them were in the late 2010s, right? Like, most of the companies have started in the last 10 years. So biotech takes a long time. And as we talk about this in the field all the time, what's our chat GPT moment? When that chat GPT moment happens, I think the conversation is going to switch a lot from aging 1.0 to what I'm calling like this aging 2.0 paradigm. How can we prevent that decline instead of just maintain it until the end? And so, we as A4LI, we're trying to get that chat GPT moment as soon as possible. And, that starts with funding more research and funding more translational studies and changing regulations and all that kind of stuff. Just also general advocacy, right? And so we're trying to change the conversation manually, but I think the real driver, the thing that's going to make grandma, call you and say, "Hey, did you see this?" is, when there's a drug available that targets the mechanisms of aging that, effectively extends healthy lifespan, right? Or reverses, some major ailment of aging in a systemic way. So the conversation is changing. People are focused on aging, but, we're trying to get them to focus on aging 2.0.
Right. And global healthcare spending is over $9 trillion a year. Yet most of it goes towards treating diseases late, not preventing them early. So if we truly treated aging as a root cause, how would healthcare spending look different?
I can't give you a great answer because I'll have to check my notes on that. I haven't done the mathematical equations necessary to give you an exact number or something specific there. But what I will say is, what I would recommend your audience looks at is the longevity dividend, right? That's the idea that it's an economic analysis that looks at what is the benefit to GDP and productivity when we extend healthy lifespan by a year.
And, there's a number of iterations out about it, but ultimately the takeaway is it's trillions of dollars of extra GDP per healthy year of life expectancy. So, whether we spend more money on, healthcare throughout the entirety of our lives because we're starting earlier, which I don't suspect will be the case. But even if that is the case, the benefit to society is so great that the costs that you spend on your healthcare are going to be, a part of the money that you are and the wealth and the, value that is created as a result of people being healthier for longer. It's interesting also because this also times up all with AI, obviously, and that's going to be a major driver and disruptor of, how people spend their money, how they're getting their money, right? So it's interesting. It's all these fields kind of converging at the same time. And I guess if you read Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near, that was the first book that I really got into, and the one, when I was getting into my longevity journey, and shocking how right Ray Kurzweil was with his timelines. I mean, we're experiencing this AGI revolution, and he predicted 2029. I mean, I think you could probably find some people out there that might argue we're at AGI now.
Yeah.
So my point in all this is, couple on the additions that we get from AI with extending healthy lifespan and the cost of, potentially more, medical bills, which again, I don't think will be the case, is totally worth it. The reason why I don't think healthcare spending for, someone in their life will be too much higher is because these therapeutics are going to be more effective, right? For example, take a reprogramming drug, take, Alcos Labs or Retro or Life Biosciences or New Limit. All of them are working on reprogramming. And, the sort of the silver bullet, right? You're not even treating the disease, you're treating the cell, and you're turning it into a cell that doesn't have any diseases because it's the state of a 30-year-old, right? And so, as those are mass produced, those costs will go down. They'll be, kind of affordable to everybody and far more effective. And, you won't have to sit in the hospital for 3 weeks and spend, I forget the amount. I saw this, several thousands of dollars per day in a hospital in the US. That's far more expensive than getting a $10,000 shot once every 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. So my point in all of this is, the prevention method is the superior method, and the aging, focus for biotech, to me, seems to be the obvious no-brainer, most effective approach to take.
And that was going to be my next question, that whenever people hear about living longer, they worry it'll only be available to the wealthy. So how do we make sure longevity breakthroughs don't become a luxury product? And I hear about these new longevity resorts of a type where all the interventions are coming together. You've got the gym, you've got the longevity spa, and there are all sorts of treatments. But if you look at the prices, they are ridiculously exorbitant. So, and I'm hoping with the evolution of this space, things will become more accessible to common people. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, like I was saying before, I mean, longevity is available today, right? Like if you have millions and millions and millions of dollars and free time and no need to really work, right? Like you can find a longevity protocol today. That's not real longevity though, because if you look at what those interventions give you, it's marginal, very marginal. And you might be able to age healthier, but are you going to prevent yourself from getting cancer entirely? Probably not. Why? Because you can have all the diagnostics and saunas and supplements you want. But until we have an actual drug that, is validated against endpoints and biomarkers in a clinical trial and is available to everybody, we don't actually have longevity. And so, I see these clinics all the time. I think they're great. I've gone to them before. I would, I think people, if you can afford it, it's worth doing. I think there's nothing more important than maintaining your health. But, that's not the longevity that I'm pushing for. I'm pushing for, mass adoption longevity. I'm pushing for more effective longevity, right? Not the marginal gains you get by, the lifestyle interventions you get. So, yeah. So again, it already is a luxury product. The longevity is already available. It's not effective. And the way to make it more effective and, not just accessible to the very, very wealthy is government involvement, right? Making sure that, the government is investing in the latest technologies, investing in translational studies
supporting companies going through clinical trials that have the potential to create the longevity drug or a longevity drug. And then, the ability for payers to cover it so that everybody has an opportunity to get it. It's only possible with government intervention. That's the only way this is going to happen in an equitable way. Otherwise, we're seeing what's happening when there's no government intervention. It's what's happening right now. And we have longevity, but it's only for people who can spend $50,000 a year on their body, or at minimum. Right. And so again, this is, when I started A4LI, I sort of realized that this was, the only pathway for longevity to become mainstream and, kind of embedded in medical practices. Right. That's ultimately what we're trying to do here is, change healthcare from the sick care and the, kind of less proactive approach that we take today to a proactive longevity mindset. Right. And so all of this stuff, finding that drug and mass producing it and getting insurers to cover it, like that's all things that need to be done at the federal and state level. Right. And so that's why, I think A4LI's mission is so critical here, because we're the only ones doing it. And it's sort of the missing key. We have, the investor interest, we have the academics doing this work now, but the only thing that's holding back this field is serious government action. So, we're getting there though.
Right. And now, with the increase in awareness about longevity, I think, do you think we need to have a separate module for creating awareness amongst people? Because I see there are so many supplements being pushed onto common people, and I don't know to what extent these supplements are helpful, but there are a lot of people who see longevity as an opportunity to make quick buck. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the fear of getting old and passing away is something that everybody fears, right? It's an easy fear to prey on, and there are people that take advantage of that. With that all being said, I think again, this is why biotech and drug development is so important, or at least clinical trials and clinical evidence is so important, right? You can. At least for supplements, it's a lot easier to put that on the shelf of CVS than it is to, get your doctor to prescribe you something. And, you don't need to go through the same rigorous testing that a compound would. So, I don't think we're ever really going to get longevity without a drug. I don't think supplements are going to be the mass adoption way, because like you said, there's so many things out there, so many competing claims, and some might work and some don't. But, how do we figure it out? Right. I also don't think supplements probably suffice to, the level that we probably need to achieve longevity. I think that's going to be done with a senolytic or a reprogramming drug or something, mitochondrial dysfunction, something like that.
Right.
With that being said, what I would suggest people do, and this is coming from a completely, I haven't taken a biology class since I was in high school kind of guy. The path to longevity right now is eat well, sleep as much as, sleep 7 to 9 hours, exercise, 3, 4, 5 times a week, right? I don't think you can go, unless you're like a health influencer, what you need to do is really just maintain yourself, right? Maintain do the basics, because at the end of the day, there are all of these biotech drugs that are entering clinical trials, and, biotechs have about somewhere between 1 and 10% of going from a preclinical company to a company that's commercialized.
Yeah.
So if there's 100 companies, right, we'll have 1 to 10 in the next couple of years that, might actually have a drug that is available, right? So my advice to everybody is, maintain yourself, stay in good enough health now so that, we can all kind of benefit from the technology that's being developed and will be available tomorrow.
Right. And there's so much happening in this space these days that you get to hear about a new innovation every single day. We've heard about the recent epigenetic reprogramming initiative by David Sinclair. I recently read a news about the Osaka University coming up with AP2A1, the drug that cleans up the senescent cells from the body. So what's realistic right now and what's still hype?
I think you could argue that everything is realistic and everything is hype, right? It's a tricky question because, you could say it's all hype because we don't have anything right now, right? There's no drug on the market that you can take for specifically aging that's proven to work. Or you can say it's reality because, you can understand that this field is about a decade old and biotech takes a long time, right? Like deliberately and intentionally,
biotech takes much longer than tech. The reason we had OpenAI and the first longevity company started about the same time. The reason we had ChatGPT 10 years, 15 years earlier is because, you don't have to go through the regulatory hurdles that with tech that you do for biotech, right? So, it is hype until something happens, but there's a lot of things that could potentially work that are in the works right now. Reprogramming, senolytics, stem cell exhaustion drugs, DNA repair drugs. You name it. There's dozens of companies doing each one of these different categories of aging or hallmarks of aging, right? So there's so many shots on goal. And if you consider that reality, then it's reality. To me, it's a reality, right? It's just a matter of, waiting and pushing as fast as, we can to get one of those drugs to market as soon as possible. So, I don't know. I think that's a tough question to answer. I'm not going to give you any hype on which drug is going to work or not. Look, I'm a political guy. I'm a policymaker. Everybody tells me all the time that their drug is going to cure aging. I believe all of them. Yeah, I believe you all. This is why we're doing a clinical trial though, right? Like to see if you're actually right or not, right? So, I don't have any specific modality that I think is going to be, I think reprogramming is very, I think that's sort of like the holy grail in many ways, but I don't have a specific company or whatever. I stay agnostic, especially in my position, right? We are working on behalf of the industry. So I try to be very neutral on everything. But I think my main takeaway to every company is, if you think you have a drug that is going to be the drug that cures aging or stops aging or affects aging, let's get you in a clinical trial. Let's prove this thing, right? Like I want to take this drug knowing that, it'll have the intended effect and I'll actually get the benefit from it. So let's prove it.
Right. So we know science is moving fast. AI is accelerating drug discovery. Biotech funding is shifting. Dylan, what has to happen in the next 5 to 10 years for longevity medicine to become mainstream?
I would say parts of longevity medicine are going mainstream. I think you could call some of MAHA like longevity light. Like they are promoting, trying to promote, and you could argue that Michelle Obama's initiatives when Obama was president were also, the beginnings of longevity. But, 50 years ago, like when my parents were born, you were told to smoke cigarettes, right? And there was nobody talked about prevention. And, you just kind of lived your life until you got a disease and then you tried to treat it. And, evidence has piled up that prevention is the best method. And so, you could argue that, prevention is already made, prevention, longevity, they're kind of equivalent in this context. You could argue that it's already mainstream, right? People understand that you need to be proactive with your health. And, people are wearing, I got my Oura ring on. People are wearing their Fitbits and their Oura rings and their Apple Watches, right? And so you could argue that longevity is mainstream. If you're talking about drugs, longevity drugs, look, people don't really, except for like GLP-1s, people don't really talk about drugs with their friends. So if you're talking about like, when is it going to enter the mainstream zeitgeist, I don't know if it ever will, right? Because like, who's talking about Ozempic and, people are talking, I guess, about Ozempic because it's, pretty wild. But nobody's talking about Keytruda or, cancer drugs or diabetes drugs. Nobody's talking about metformin or
rapamycin.
Right. So, in our circles, we're talking about that. But the average, if you're talking about when is longevity going to become like a mainstream topic, I don't know if, I think it'll just become mainstream within medical practice. Like, and that's what we're pushing for. Right. And so, I think the tilt towards that is already happening. If you look at some of these big pharma companies, a lot of them are partnering with biotechs in the longevity space. Partnerships or straight up investments. Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk are coming to the aging conferences and calling GLP-1 drugs the first longevity drug. Like that's happening today. Like that happened all in 2025, 2024. So it's happening, I think I think if you're talking about mainstream, like, is it going to be funded and focused on in a biomedical setting, research setting at the same level as cancer drugs are? I think that probably will happen in the next couple, 5 to 10 years. It's already starting on that path. There's already investment in the space. There's already partnerships. There's already these research labs that these pharma companies and these, big biotechs want to spin out that are regarding aging, right? So this is all happening right now. The shift is happening. I would guess it'll happen, that we'll see, and this is also, I guess, part of A4LI's mission here is, when will we see, aging biology research be at the same level or a similar level to Alzheimer's or cancer or diabetes or whatever, right? Most advocacy organizations really kind of take off for space like this in like 8 to 10 years. We're at year 4 right now, right? I think in the next couple of years, like we will see budgets at the NIA Division of Aging Biology that are pretty similar to Alzheimer's funding,
right,
and cancer funding, etc.
Yeah.
Right. The political consciousness is evolving. Like, this is our work, right? So as we can, as we're just around more and the field grows and there's more and more conversations that we have, this is just going to eventually, make its way from policymakers to the appropriators to the agencies, to the labs, and then, to the biotechs, right? It starts all with the government, but, obviously like the private industry and pharma has their own track here. And that's happening independently of what we're doing at A4LI, these pharma companies coming in and partnering with biotech. So it's very exciting. I mean, I can't give you like when is it going to be mainstream? I can't say like 7 years and 2 months because I don't know, but next decade, that's the vision, that's the goal. And, I think that's possible and maybe even probable.
Sure. And I sometimes wonder if we will ever see government-led democratization of longevity interventions like we saw in case of COVID vaccine. Do you think that's a possibility?
No, I don't. I don't think that's necessarily the right path to take either. I think if they think we're getting kind of COVID-y, but I think part of the pushback to the vaccine was the mandate itself, right? And so, and look, I talk to people all the time. People, I think they're kind of, trapped in this like aging trance. If you talk to Aubrey about the aging trance at all, he talks about it all the time. But like people have convinced themselves that it's not possible, and so they think it's a bad thing, or that they don't want to live, healthier and longer. But anyways, so aging trance aside, I think people should have the option, right? If you want to take the longevity drug, you should, the idea of government forcing you to live longer is pretty dystopian too, in many ways. The future needs to be free, right? And choices, this goes to my general political philosophies, but more control and more mandates is not going to help anything. It's going to create resistance and make this an issue space that is kind of partisan if we force it. And I think the better path is, let's have the people who adopt it, and then just like the computer. The first people that adopted it, and then the detractors of the computer kind of waited, and then they saw how awesome a computer was, and then they also adopted it, right? Like the first 20% of the population is going to get the longevity drug, and the 80% will wait and see, and then they'll be like, oh wait, why do I not want this? I obviously want to be healthier and live longer, right? There's no question about that. So I don't think having governments, forced government mandates or anything is a good idea. I think, you could definitely make an argument that we should be doing things as a government to make sure that everybody is as healthy as possible. And, you can maybe lump this into that argument, but I think that's a great way to build tension in society, remove optionality and choice from people's lives, which I don't think we need anymore.
Maybe it'll be like Botox. You have a choice. There are plenty of clinics available. If you want it, go for it. It's your preference. It's your choice.
Yeah, Botox. Yes, it's somewhere between Botox and COVID in terms of like, I think, because look, I'm not gonna get. Maybe I'll get Botox. Who knows? I don't know. Who knows what I'll be looking like in 30 years. But the real differentiator here is this is actually going to affect more than your just aesthetics, right? People will see people that like I'm throwing out a scenario here, but my grandma is going to take the longevity drug, right? And she'll be with peers that aren't taking the longevity drug, and the peers will be like, oh, why is Dylan's grandma able to still walk around at 90 the way she was at 80, right? Or whatever it is. And that'll trickle down, right? So like the word of mouth and the general understanding that this is something that you want to do, because some people might not want to do Botox, right? But this, this is, it's going to be understood that this is something that you want to do for yourself. And then, I think ultimately, we'll kind of catch on and become the norm for people.
Right. And imagine people living to 100 years in good health, working longer, reinventing careers, delaying retirement. How would longer, healthier lives change society, not just medicine?
So I talk about A4LI a lot in phase 1 and phase 2. And phase 1 is getting the drug, that the longevity drug or drugs to market. And phase 2 is these drugs exist. People are living till 100, healthy. How do we, kind of reorganize society? So you might want to ask me that question again in like I said, 10 years or whenever that, we've achieved longevity, because that's when I'll start, thinking about that a little more. But I say that tongue in cheek because, we have thought about it, right? Obviously the more important aspect right now is actually getting to that point, but if everybody is living healthy to 65, right, and able to participate in the economy, what does that mean for Medicare? Does that mean we need Medicare? What does health insurance look like from there? Do we only insure catastrophic injuries and, accidents? I think those are the kind of questions that are sort of asked when something like this happens. Is Medicare and Social Security, are they sustainable if people are living till 100, but maybe retiring at 65? How to work relate, again, how does your work career look, right? Are you able to, are employers, we already see this today for different reasons, but people don't stay at jobs for more than, a couple of years usually.
Yeah.
So, how does the employer-employee relationship look? Is it, short-term contracts? Are people, going to go back to school at 60, 70, 80? Is that going to be commonplace to learn something new, to, fraternize with people that are, maybe not 18-year-olds anymore, and maybe, kind of more of a diverse age range of society? How do relationships look? Like, are people going to be biologically 20, but chronologically 80, dating 20-year-olds? And, what does that mean for childbearing, right? Like, these are the questions that, phase 2 entail. I just kind of listed them off. We're still, I would say, 5, 10 years away from the longevity drugs. So ask me again in like 5 years and I'll give you a better answer.
Right. And I think if we put this adjacent to another reality, which is the evolution of AI, and there are speculations that 10 years down the line, most people won't have a job and they'll live forever. So what are they going to do with their time? I think those are some of the questions that you might come across very frequently.
Totally. And I don't know where I stand on the AGI debate.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert on this at all, but I just had ChatGPT. I don't know if you've seen the thread where ChatGPT tells the person says, I'm 100 meters from the car wash. Should I walk to the car wash or should I, have you seen
Yeah,
this?
I saw
Or should I drive my car? And ChatGPT is like, oh, you should walk. And we're like, what are you talking about? Are you going to get the, So, depending on where we are with AI, I obviously in enough time, it's going to, it's going to have the ability to replace every job at some point in the future. It could be, next year, it could be 5, 10, 20 years from now. I don't know. Do I think that jobs for humans will cease to exist? No. And do I think, activities for people, whether they're leisure or professional, will cease to exist? No. And, AI is a different case than, social media or, the car being invented, right? Like those very clearly replaced old technology and the old jobs with new technology and new jobs, right? We lost the horse and buggy driver, but we got, car manufacturing jobs, right? So my point in all of this is, if history is any example, new jobs will be created. And if not, we'll get to travel the world. And, this will also be at the, cross section or the crossing point of when space is going to be more accessible to people, right? So, maybe we'll just explore the universe and, spend time with our friends and enjoy life, right? And kind of get back to the basics, right? Kind of just focus on eating and socializing and loving. And I think that's a beautiful future. I love work. Like I said, this is my life's mission. If I could kick my feet up and chill out for the rest of my life, I would be okay with that. That would be fine. If I could sit on some island somewhere. I think people look at, the emergence of AI as and the loss of jobs or the replacement of all jobs as a negative far too much. Most people hate their jobs. Right? Like if you could just do whatever you wanted and you weren't, forced to go sit at a desk for 8 hours a day, like, what would you do with your time? I don't know. Like it's going to be interesting too, because I think a lot of people are going to, at that point, whenever it is, when jobs are really fully replaced, there's going to be a lot of people who've had jobs for 20 years and they're like, wow, what do I do with my life now? So it's definitely a contention point for society. I don't know. I don't know where we're going with all this, but I like the idea of being able to chill out on a beach for as long as possible. So, if I don't have a job because of AI and longevity exists, that sounds like the best case scenario for me.
Exactly. And if at all that times come, we'll all be like senescent cells, not productive, not dying.
Right. But, that sounds good to me. As long as we don't secrete the nasty toxins to the other cells
But
around
who
us,
knows?
then we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as long as we're secreting good stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, look, this is also the fascinating thing about thinking about technology and futurism and all this stuff is, how do we chart an unchartable journey, right? Like, I feel like humanity is kind of like Columbus going across the sea, like not knowing at all what's on the other side, having some idea and finding something, that he didn't expect to find, right? He was going to India and he ended up in North America, right? So I see humanity as, the crew of Columbus's ship. And I think it's very exciting not knowing exactly what's going to happen. That's, part of the purpose of life. If we knew exactly what was going to happen, then life wouldn't be as fun.
And Dylan, every major breakthrough creates second order effects. The internet changed everything. Not all of it is positive. So what risk or unexpected challenges could come with extending human lifespan?
I mean, bad people can live longer, like dictators, right? That is a possibility. But, I do think the sort of finality of life and aging itself is a cop out for a lot of people and sort of leads to increased levels of greed in some, people that, we probably brand as corrupt. Right now, if you're 80 years old, you're probably thinking, I'm going to do whatever I want. And, I'm going to be dead in 5 years anyways. Right. So like, who cares what I do? Who cares if I mess up the next generation? Who cares if I pollute? Who cares if I steal or whatever it is? Right. So maybe these evil people, with the idea of having to live in a longer time scale will become less greedy. But, we run the risk of bad people and good people equally having access to these drugs. Right. So that's one potential pitfall. But again, like I said, I don't think that's an issue. Other than that, I mean, I don't know. Look, some people bring up boredom. Like if you're living too long, you might get bored. If that sounds like a you problem. If you're getting bored, then go find your hobby or something. Go do something, or just be bored.
So, Dylan, a personal question to you. You're not just building policy, you are shaping something that could affect billions of lives. So, what keeps you up at night about this mission?
Other things keep me up at night. Not this. I'm very hopeful about longevity. Now, obviously there's the, pitfalls that we spoke about before, right? There's people in the media that might spin this different ways. There's opposition that might form. But again, I think this is really just the natural evolution of technology and medicine, right? And so sooner rather than later, honestly, with or without A4LI, really, in my opinion, this field is going to become mainstream. Now, the purpose of A4LI is to accelerate that to as fast as possible. And then also, be an organization for thought leadership on how to ultimately restructure society as a result of these fascinating and fantastic changes to biomedical research and healthcare. It's going to happen, right? Like, I truly believe that at some point in the next, decades is a pretty, I think, reasonable timeline. So yeah, I mean, nothing really keeps me up, I guess, at night about this mission. I mean, there's things about the organization and running an organization day to day that keep me up at night. But, in terms of the overall mission, I'm pretty confident that, this will happen in, a reasonable time frame. There's so many, like I'm saying, the thing that's going to unlock, what's going to unlock this field is that ChatGPT moment. And with so many assets in clinical development right now, I mean, just if you look at the numbers, the probability that one of the hundreds that are in a phase 1, 2, or 3 that are going to work are pretty good, right? Again, 1 to 10% will make it. I like our odds here, right? And that'll all happen in the next 5 to 10 years. That's when I suspect the ChatGPT moment will happen. And then beyond there, the floodgates are open, right? So I'm not, I would say I'm more worried about things with A4LI than I am with the overall field. Yeah, I'm pretty hopeful though.
Right. Yeah. And what gives you the most hope right now?
Most hope, the fact that the numbers are on our side, I would say. I was just saying, probabilities and odds are telling us that we should be feeling pretty good about that ChatGPT moment sometime in the next couple of years. Just the pure numbers of, how easy it is and how hard it is to get a drug approved and commercialized, and then also how many companies and drugs are in the space right now. So I'm hopeful because, and I'm also hopeful because this is turning into an industry, right? There are players coming into the field that are not just Aubrey. Like when Aubrey, if I was my age in 2005 when Aubrey started this, I would feel much less hopeful because the ecosystem needs to be built. The funders, the researchers, the investors, the advocates, none of that existed back then. But now we have an ecosystem that, with or without me, if I, God forbid, die, in a car crash, this field goes on, and it's a community and people work together, and more people are coming into the fold every day. So, the ball is rolling, right? Like that gives me hope. Like the ball is rolling, it depends on where you think we are down the mountain. Maybe we're at more of a flat land than a steep drop, and you're not satisfied with the rate of progress, but we're going to hit that, steep drop off in the mountain at some point, right? The mountains can't stay flat forever, right? It's going to happen. And that, with or without me, with or without anybody individual in this field, with or without Aubrey, with or without David Sinclair, this is going to happen, right? Because there's so many other people doing this work now, and it's not just a niche field for some cool people to give TED Talks on. It's an actual industry with billions of dollars flowing through it. So it's very exciting.
Very well said. And that brings us to the end of our today's conversation, Darren. As we close today's conversation, I keep coming back to one thought. For most of human history, aging has been destiny. You were born, you lived, you declined, you died. And medicine's job was simply to delay the inevitable. But what we discussed today suggests something different, that aging might not just be a timeline. It might be biology. And biology can be studied, measured, influenced. And if that's true, then this isn't a scientific debate. It's a societal crossroads. Because if we extend healthy lifespan, not just survival, but vitality, we don't just change medicine. We change how long we work, how long we learn, how long we love, and how long we contribute. But it also forces hard questions. Who gets access? How do we pay for it? What systems must evolve? And perhaps the biggest question of all, are we ready to live longer lives? Not just biologically, but socially and ethically. Dylan, what you are working on sits at the intersection of science and structure of innovation and governance. And whether someone agrees, disagrees, or still undecided, one thing is clear. The conversation about aging has changed, and it's only just beginning. So thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing your invaluable insights, knowledge, and wisdom with us. Thank you.